What if the silence you're afraid of is actually the very thing that will save you? We live in a world that constantly tells us to speak louder, share more, put every piece of our lives on display. From social media to dinner tables, there is this pressure to be visible, to be open, to let everyone know everything about us. And yet, the more we reveal, the emptier we sometimes feel, because not everyone deserves access to the deepest parts of who we are. Not everyone has earned the right to hold our truth. Think about it. How many times have you trusted someone with your story, only to feel the sting of their judgment later? How many times have you put your heart out on display, only to realize it was mishandled? We've all been there, and in those moments, silence begins to feel like a shield. Not because you're hiding, but because you're protecting something sacred. Your peace, your heart, your truth. Silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that not every battle deserves your voice, not every thought deserves an audience, and not every part of you is meant to be explained or defended. Sometimes silence is the most powerful response, because when you hold your peace, you hold your power. There's a false belief that sharing everything makes us authentic. But true authenticity is not about exposure, it's about alignment. It's knowing what parts of you are safe to share and what parts are sacred enough to protect. Silence is not a wall that keeps people out. It's a gate that lets the right people in. And here's the beautiful truth. When you learn to embrace silence, you begin to experience a freedom that no applause, no approval, no validation could ever give you. You stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop justifying, and you begin to simply be. So today I want to invite you into a new perspective. What if privacy isn't isolation, but a gift? What if silence isn't emptiness, but a sanctuary? What if the strongest thing you could ever say is nothing at all? Because sometimes, silence doesn't mean you've lost your voice. It means you've found your strength. I remember a time in my own life when silence felt like the only safe place I had left. There was a season where I believed the lie that vulnerability meant sharing every part of myself with everyone around me. I thought if I opened up completely, people would understand me, love me deeper, and stand by me. So I gave pieces of myself away, my fears, my struggles, my private hopes. I shared with friends who hadn't earned that level of trust, and I even shared with strangers online, chasing connection in places that weren't safe. At first, it felt liberating, almost like I had finally taken the mask off. But slowly, the weight of their responses began to crush me. Some judged, some dismissed, some twisted my story into gossip. And I found myself sitting in my room one night, feeling emptier than ever, wondering why honesty had left me feeling more broken instead of whole. It was in that silence, after the noise of everyone's opinions had faded, that I realized something important. Vulnerability without boundaries is not courage, it's exposure. And exposure without care can wound you. That night, I made a quiet promise to myself. I promised I would no longer hand out pieces of my story to people who hadn't proven they could hold them gently. I would no longer beg for validation by oversharing parts of my life that were meant to be nurtured in private. I chose silence not as a retreat, but as a declaration of self-respect. And you know what happened? At first, it was hard. Friends noticed I was quieter. Some accused me of being distant. Others pulled away because they weren't getting the same access to me anymore. And yes, I grieved those losses. But slowly, something inside me began to shift. In the space of that silence, I found my own voice again, not the one shaped by opinions, but the one anchored in truth. Privacy gave me back my strength. It gave me room to breathe, to heal, to choose who deserved to walk alongside me. And the people who stayed, the ones who respected my boundaries, who didn't demand access to every thought and secret, they became my safe circle. They proved that love doesn't need constant explanation. This story isn't just mine. I've seen it play out in so many lives. Maybe you've lived it too. Maybe you've overshared with someone you trusted, only to feel betrayed. Maybe you've spoken when silence would have protected your peace. Maybe you've carried the weight of giving too much of yourself away. But here's what I want you to remember. Silence isn't rejection, it's protection. Privacy doesn't mean you're cold or closed off. It means you know your worth. You are not obligated to make your life a public book for others to read and critique. You are allowed to have chapters that are yours alone. The lesson I learned is simple. Silence is a gift. It shields you from unnecessary pain. It teaches you discernment. And it creates space for the people who truly deserve to hear your story. And the day I embraced that truth was the day I finally felt free. We often grow up hearing that silence is weakness, that keeping things to ourselves means we're hiding, or worse, that we're ashamed. But what if we've misunderstood silence all along? What if silence isn't about fear, but about wisdom? The truth is, silence holds power because it creates space. Space for us to think before we speak. Space for us to protect what's sacred. Space for us to choose carefully who we trust with the deepest parts of ourselves. In a culture that rewards oversharing, it takes courage to hold things back. It takes strength to say, this part of me belongs only to me, or to the people I know I can trust. Think about the most meaningful relationships in your life. They aren't built on blasting everything out into the world. They're built on trust, respect, and time. Silence is what allows trust to form, because trust is not about how much you tell, it's about how safe you feel telling it. Privacy isn't about building walls, it's about setting gates. You decide who to let in, when, and how much. And that choice is not selfish, it's healthy. Silence also teaches us discernment. Not everyone who asks to know your story deserves to hear it. Some people are simply curious, others may be careless, and a few may even use your words against you. But when you practice silence, you learn to recognize the difference between those who want to listen and those who simply want to take. And in that discernment, you reclaim your power. Another reason silence matters is because it teaches us self-trust. When you can sit with yourself in quiet, when you no longer feel pressured to explain or prove or defend, you start to discover a deeper truth. You are enough as you are. You don't need the world's applause to validate your worth. You don't need constant feedback to know if your choices are right. Silence grounds you. It gives you permission to listen to your own heart. But perhaps the most powerful part of silence is this: it protects your peace. Oversharing can drain you. Explaining yourself over and over can leave you exhausted. Defending your choices to people who never intended to understand you can break your spirit. Silence saves you from that. It gives you a safe space to breathe, to rest, to simply exist without having to justify why. There's a saying that goes, "Don't tell your big dreams to small minds." And it's true. Some things lose their power when they're spoken too soon, to the wrong people. Silence preserves the things still growing inside of you. Your dreams, your healing, your next steps, they need privacy to flourish. Just like seeds need to be buried in soil before they break into light, some parts of your journey need to stay hidden until they're ready. So when people ask, "Why don't you talk about this? Why don't you share more?" Remember this: your silence is not an absence of truth. It's a presence of strength. It's not about hiding. It's about honoring. You honor yourself when you protect your story. You honor your growth when you don't rush it into the open. And you honor your future when you give your dreams the privacy they need to bloom. Silence is not empty. It's full of clarity, full of power, full of peace. And the sooner we stop seeing it as weakness, the sooner we'll recognize it for what it truly is: a gift. There comes a moment in life when you realize that not every voice deserves your response, and not every opinion deserves your energy. That moment is where transformation begins. The shift from living in noise to living in peace. For so long, many of us live under the weight of noise. The noise of expectations, the noise of gossip, the noise of people constantly asking for pieces of us we don't have the strength to give. And without realizing it, we let that noise shape who we become. We start explaining ourselves more than living. We start performing more than being. We start giving away our peace just to keep others comfortable. But then something changes. Maybe it's heartbreak. Maybe it's betrayal. Maybe it's simply exhaustion. But one day, you wake up and realize you don't have to keep living like this. You don't have to keep handing out access to your soul like it's public property. You don't have to keep shouting to be seen. You can choose silence. And in that silence, you find peace. The transformation is not instant. It's gradual. At first, silence feels uncomfortable. You feel the urge to defend yourself, to prove your worth, to explain why you're pulling back. You might worry that people will misunderstand you, that they'll think you're distant or cold. And yes, some will. But here's what's beautiful. The people who truly matter won't demand explanations. They'll honor your boundaries. They'll respect your quiet. And slowly you realize that silence doesn't drive away the right people. It reveals them. As you lean into silence, you begin to notice something new. Peace is louder than noise. The more you protect your energy, the more clarity you gain. The more you withhold your story from those who can't hold it, the more powerful it feels when you choose to share with someone who can. And the more you step back from the chaos, the more you discover who you are without all the voices pulling at you. This is the transformation silence offers. It shifts your focus from external approval to internal alignment. You stop asking, "What will they think of me?" and start asking, "What do I think of me?" You stop trying to control how others see you, and you begin to nurture how you see yourself. That shift is freedom. That shift is peace. And peace changes everything. It changes how you walk into a room, because you no longer need to prove your worth. It changes how you handle conflict, because you learn that not every battle requires your voice. It changes how you build relationships, because you value depth over exposure. And it changes how you see yourself, because you finally realize you are enough, even in silence. The beauty of this transformation is that it's not about isolation. It's not about cutting yourself off from the world. It's about living with intention. It's about knowing when to speak and when to stay quiet. It's about creating balance between vulnerability and privacy. Silence becomes less about shutting out the world and more about letting in peace. One day, you'll look back and realize that silence wasn't emptiness. It was the soil where your strength grew. It was the space where your dreams took root. It was the sanctuary where you learned to breathe again. And you'll be grateful, not for the noise that once defined you, but for the quiet that rebuilt you. Because when silence protects you, it doesn't just shield you from harm. It transforms you into someone stronger, calmer, and freer than you ever thought you could be. There's a power in silence that the world will never teach you. Because the world profits from your noise. It profits when you overshare, when you compare, when you give your energy away to every passing opinion. But the truth is, silence is where your soul regains its power. And now it's your choice. Will you keep living in noise, or will you step into the peace that silence offers? I want you to pause for a moment and ask yourself, what would my life look like if I stopped explaining myself to everyone? What if I stopped posting every detail, stopped defending every choice, stopped justifying every dream? What if instead, I allowed my silence to protect me? Imagine the energy you would save. Imagine the peace you would feel. Imagine how much more sacred your story would become. Choosing silence doesn't mean hiding. It doesn't mean you're weak or afraid. It means you know your worth. It means you've learned that not every voice deserves a response. Not every question deserves an answer. And not every piece of your story deserves to be handed out freely. It means you've realized that some parts of you are too valuable to be put on display. That kind of choice is not weakness. It is wisdom. Here's what I've learned. The people who truly love you don't need constant access to every detail of your life. They don't demand explanations. They don't guilt you for protecting your privacy. They stand with you even in silence. And the people who walk away when you stop giving them your every thought, they were never meant to stay. Your silence will reveal what noise was hiding. So let this be your reminder. Silence is strength. Silence is peace. Silence is freedom. When you choose silence, you choose yourself. You choose to value your own energy over the demands of others. You choose to protect your peace instead of feeding someone else's curiosity. You choose to give your dreams the privacy they need to grow. And here's the most powerful truth of all. Silence teaches you to listen, not to the crowd, not to the noise, but to your own heart. In the quiet, you hear the whisper of who you really are. You hear the truth that's been drowned out for too long. You hear the reminder that you are enough, not because the world claps for you, but because you are whole in your being. So tonight, when you lay your head down, I want you to whisper this to yourself. My silence is not emptiness. My silence is strength. My silence is my gift. And tomorrow, live like it's true. Protect your peace. Guard your story. Speak when it matters. And stay silent when it saves you. Because in the end, the world doesn't need the loudest version of you. It needs the truest one. And sometimes the truest version of you speaks loudest in silence. Your story is sacred. Your peace is priceless. And your silence, it just might be the most powerful thing you ever own.